There is nothing in video that will make your video look better than having your own custom colorization on it. Okay? More people than not leave their film looking just like it is, add no color to it, and it looks flat. Your favorite YouTubers guarantee have a different color scheme on all of their videos, or probably have a styled color that they put on all of their videos. Okay? That's what we're going to start to look at. If you look at this video you're looking at right now, the primary color you're going to see is green. If you look at the walls around me, they kind of look greenish. They're not. That wall's blue. Cameras read things in a little bit more of a green tone than they actually are. This is because when cameras originally started, they were filming for this color skin. It was a little pink. The opposite of pink is green. It helped take away some of that pinkness of the skin, right? So that's what they were doing. We need to counterbalance that color action. We need to fix that color action. And we're going to look at how to do that by adding some crazy colors on this clip. Okay, so let's shrink this down. Let's go into Premiere. So over here, what you can see, we've got our 8 separate clips. Okay, at the top, we've got different types of workspaces, and we haven't really explored much other than the editing workspace. I want you to click on the one that says color this time. Now, when you click color, you get this Lumetri color option on the right hand side. And there's a lot of different things you can play around with in here. There's a lot of crazy stuff that you can do with this. And this isn't all the color options either. There's a lot of stuff. So let's start on your first clip, whatever it is. Now, underneath basic corrections right here, you can change some of the different options that it has. So input LUT. A LUT is a preset colorization that you can add. Something that's already been built and you can add into it. For example, I can blow it out like that. I can darken it. I can add this ultra contrast look. I mean, these are just built in and set ready. I want to leave that at none though. I don't want to play with the LUTs just yet. We will. Temperature. Whether it's cool or warm tone. Key. This is clearly a cooler toned image. It's got a little touch of color, a little touch of warmth in that one orange, but it's definitely a cooler tone. I can pump that up, or I can go the opposite way and get more greens out of that middle bar, which I think it's supposed to be green there, and I can add some warmth to it. Play around with these. Don't feel like you have to stick on mine. Tint. I can add that little touch of green that I might need, or I can go the other way, which should give me a little bit more of a real look. Anytime you're filming for yourself, pump up the tint on that pink just a little bit to counterbalance that natural green that the camera makes. Okay? As far as tone, exposure is how much light would hit that camera, how bright you want to make that. Contrast is the difference between your light and your black areas. The more contrast you have, the more darker the blacks are going to be, the whiter the lights are going to be. Okay? Highlights, you should know what that is. That's just pumping up the brighter areas, right? Shadows, the opposite, bringing down the darker areas or up the darker areas. Whites are the specific brightest points that it's going to pop up. Blacks are the same way, the particular darker points. So play around with that. And then right here at the bottom, you've got an option for saturation. You can pump up your saturation so these colors are as vivid as they want to be, or you can take them away entirely and turn this black and white. So that's just what you want to play with. Use these to do whatever you want to this clip. Now when you're done, we're going to move down to the next clip. My base 2 clip, whichever one you have here is fine. I want to go to creative. And in creative, I want to look where it says look. It says none currently. These are the extreme LUTs. These are the crazy LUTs. There's so many different types of LUTs out there. It's nuts. So look down here through some of these. I want you to click on these different LUTs and kind of get that feeling for what some of these look like. Some of them, it'll say things like gold or warm. They might not do that because this clip is particularly dark, but you can kind of move to some of those different ones. You'll notice Matrix, Blue, Green, and Mars down here. I don't know if you've watched the movies for the Matrix, but they had a specific LUT over their entire film where everything was kind of greeny blue looking. And they kept that throughout. The word noir, N-O-I-R, is a form of black and white, so that's like talking old school black noir. And you can create different types of contrast in black and white. We will create an entirely black and white film at one point. Underneath these LUTs, you'll see the word intensity. Now, intensity means it will pump up that look even more than what it is or less than what it is. It'll blend with the original film. Okay? So I want you to find a different type of LUT, something that makes this clip look entirely different, and pump up that intensity to 100. Okay? Move down to the next clip. And I'm still on this base. Ooh, excuse me. I got these extra clips in here. Let me fix that real quick. Alright, so I'm still on that base. And I want you to notice on the last one that FX icon is now purple. Purple is with the color it's going to give it for color effects. Remember, yellow will be actual effects. So if you have actual effects on it, it'll be yellow. Alright, let's move underneath creative, underneath this LUT idea, and let's start with working with our own adjustments. Okay, so faded film, you can kind of play around with that, how that's going to do, lightening things up, kind of giving it that faded look. Sharpen, I generally don't mess with. It gives things kind of an odd look in general, but you can play with it. Vibrance is how bright you want this to be. And saturation, again, is your how much color do you want or how little color do you want. And we'll leave that about like that. Now, underneath you've got an option to change your colors based on what you're looking for. Current one I'm on, it says shadow tint. So in the darker areas, what color is it going to give me? In the darker colors, do I want it to be green, red, pink, blue? Pick something different from the original is all I'm asking. Just don't go blue. The highlight tint will do the same thing, but again with the lighter areas. So I can fade this into a different color scheme entirely. This film that came in so blue can have different types of looks. So change those. Tint balance, if you want it to be more highlight or more shadow, whichever kind of floats your boat, I'm going to leave it in the middle. Once done, you can close up creative and move on to the next clip, the drums. Now, I'm going to open up curves. Curves are where the real magic happens as far as coloring. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff with these curves. RGB curves, remember everything in film is red, green, blue. That's how they make their colors in film. So I can alter those red, greens, and blues to change here. The white is the main one. It's your brightness and it's your setup. You'll notice when you hover on this little line right here, you get a pen tool. When you click, you can make an anchor point. And you can drag this line around as much as you want. Most people, me included, believe in creating a little bit of an S-shaped curve, like this, in order to give it a little more contrast. So the bottoms down here are your shadows, the tops are your highlights. So I want to pump up the highlights, drop the shadows down a little darker, okay? Now I'll click on red, and now my red line will pop up. Well, you'll see that there's a lot of red going on in this clip in general. Let's say I want to drop that down. I want to pump up the shadow reds, but I want to drop these down dramatically. I get a kind of crazy look going on all of a sudden. Try it with greens. Drag your greens up, drag your greens down. What I want you to do is just experiment here, okay? Generally, you don't want to create weird stuff like this, but you know, for today, knock your socks off. And then my blues, which are barely existent in this clip, I'm just going to pump up way up. So as you can see, all of a sudden, this clip takes a dramatically different look than what it had before. Now, hue versus saturation, you can kind of pump these up and kind of play around with the color that you have versus your saturation. Hue versus hue, hue versus luma or luma. You can play around with these to give even different looks, okay? I turned all kinds of ugly there. So play around with these, come up with an entirely different look for this clip. That's what I'm looking for. When you're done, you can close your curves. Moving on to the next drum 2 for me. Alright, so here I'm going to play with the color wheels. And the color wheels are fairly simple. They allow you in a similar way to before to play around with the different colors based on the tone that it's reading, whether it be the shadows, midtones, or highlights. This is just a little bit more of an extreme version of the original. You can pump up your saturation or your fadedness to these colors and kind of get different looks. All of these create different styles, and really the goal is to create something that's very subtle. You don't want to go extreme like this necessarily, or certainly not like this, because there's nothing subtle about that color change. But again, comparison this to the original, this is a little bit more of a, it's extreme, but it's a little bit more subtle than the previous. Alright, so let's color that down and go to HSL. Alright, hue, saturation, luma is what that stands for. You can do a lot of different things playing around with these different sets. If I grab that color, it's going to read that color. So I'll use the color set, I'll use this little eyedropper, and I'll click on the color above. It'll read the colors that you're generally seeing here. You can pump those colors up and add a little bit more variety to what's being seen. I can pump up the greens and blues a little darker. Down here, you can play around with which colors you're working with. Denoise will take out some of the fuzz. Blur will obviously blur it a little bit. And correction, this is where you would go to correct that temperature problem that I was talking about earlier of everything popping out green. So you can add that color, and you can kind of see what the original color of this film was before that green was all over the place. That guitar is not green. Temperature, add a pump to that. Same as before. Tint, contrast, sharpen, they all do the same basic thing. Okay? Close that down. Move on to the next one. Vignette. Vignette is that darkening around the edges of your film. Back in the day, this was like a camera thing. Cameras couldn't read all the color to the edge of the film. So in the old days, you saw a lot of this kind of going on, where things were always darker at the edges like this, right? Nowadays, we really have more control over it. And if you remember from the video that we did last week where we were talking about the different cuts and edits, this is another place where you could go in to add like an iris transition if you wanted to, kind of fade down. You can fade up, of course. You can go to brighter if you'd want to, but it's up to you kind of how you want to do this. I want you to add a fairly dark vignette to this guy, kind of like that, where everything's clearly darker. And then I want you to close up vignette. Now, as I move down this setup, get my hand tool so I can move, I should be left with one extra clip here, okay? This one extra clip, what I want you to do is go absolutely nuts. I want you to add a different LUT, temperature. I want you to play with everything. The creative, all of it on this one clip. See what you can do. Make something that looks extreme. Make something that looks insane. Pump up those curves. Good Lord. Pump down those curves. Good Lord. I want you to see that you can do a lot of different things in this, okay? It is not limited to any specific thing. If you want to get as artistic as you want to get in creating these different looks, you certainly can. Don't get me wrong. The trick is toning yourself down when needed. Going crazy when needed. Making it match the clips, making it match the story, making it match the general setup that you've set up for your film. Remember, if your film is calm, slow, low-key, with a little bit of a twist, this film right here is going to look insane for you, right? Whereas if you kind of come in and look at something like that, maybe that calm, low-key look might fit a little better with that color scheme. Maybe the cooler tones express kind of a darker depression or a sadness, whereas the warmer tones give you more of a happy feeling, right? You have to experiment and play around with these different things. There's no like easy answer on how to do each clip for yourself, but you need to make sure that you're doing it in comparison to what the film says. It shouldn't contrast. Now, one thing I will show you is that if you want to double up an effect, let's say you've got 100 clips here and you want to add this effect to the 100 clips, you can add it to your original clip on the project panel, or you can click on one clip and hit Command C to copy, and then on the second one, Command V to paste. It generally will give you an option to copy attributes. What attributes do you want to copy? So you can kind of play around with that as well. If you go up to edit, you'll have options in here to kind of move things around as well. Experiment, play around. There's nothing else you can do about it sometimes but to play around. Last thing, in the source panel up here, I want you to look for the word effects control. I want you to click on your clip that you currently have your playhead on, and I want you to shrink down motion, opacity, and time. The only thing that should be open should be Lumetri color. Each one of these effects that you've added can be altered right here in your effects control. Anytime you add any kind of effects, anytime this thing on your clip changes color, you can add effects to it. So for example, this drum, let's say I want him to go to black and white. I can add a saturation keyframe here, move him down, and drop that saturation down to nothing. And then look at this. All of a sudden, I have that fading effect to my color. It fades from color to black and white. So any effect you make, you have the ability to alter and edit right here in your effects control and play around with. Okay? There are all kinds of cool things and effects that you can create if you get a little nutty with it. Go crazy. You have to experiment. I can show you how to make a film green all day. The way you make a film, a piece of film green versus how I do, should be completely different from each other. You should have a completely wild look. I should have something different, right? Play around with it. Now, click on your timeline for me, and up at the top, go to File, Export Media, or Control and Command M is the shortcut for this. We need to export this footage. Now, generally, I'm going to want my format as H.264, as we've gone over. That's your MP4 setting. Output name, you need to name this. Your name dash sequence. If I download 800 clips that say the word sequence, I'm going to get mad. So dtrip dash sequence for me. Notice where you're saving it, because right now I guarantee you're not saving it into the week 5 folder. You're going to save it into whatever the last thing you did was. This is one of the other problems that kids have all the time. They don't correct where they're saving their work, and then they lose it. They're like, I have no idea where I saved it. I'm like, what do you want me to do about it? I can't resave it for you now that you've exited out. So make sure you're on the week 5 folder under desktop and hit save. And then down here, be careful, because if your source range is marked to sequence in and out, if I have an in and an out point marked on my sequence anywhere, that's the only thing it's going to export. So I want entire sequence every time. Once there, hit export. Now, I'm hoping and praying you did not crash your computer today. This was a lot on the general Premiere Workspace. It's a lot for Premiere in general, but I'm glad you were able to get through it. Once done, make sure that you come in here, not into there, into the color workspace and submit your MP4 with at least 6 different color variations on your 6 different or more clips. Play around. I want to see you experiment with these things. As we're working on our actual projects, I'm going to expect everything to have a color alteration to it. There are other ways to do it. There's ways to put it on your entire film quickly. We'll go into those when we start looking at adjustment layers. Okay? But for right now, make sure you know how to alter the color of a clip. All right? So in the next lesson, we'll move on to something different. It'll still involve that same project, so make sure you still have that open. We'll see you in the next one.